everyone, it's Wacky Anime with here to present you with What If Issei Became Alastor Part 2. Let's go and get into it. Currently, Issei is walking down the stairs in his home, going all the way to the kitchen and making some jambalaya for him and his family. As soon as he makes the jambalaya, he immediately calls down his mom and dad, going up to their room, knocking on the door a few times, getting them out, and going down the stairs. As soon as they start eating, immediately the dad gets suspicious of the jambalaya. He starts smelling it. He starts literally testing it in different areas and says, You didn't put any human meat in this one, did you? And Issei said, No, I didn't do that. Immediately, Issei's dad looks at him, and just his eyes says, I don't trust you. And Issei says, Oh, let me prove it. I'll go ahead and eat it. Like, he starts eating it, and immediately the dad's like, oh, okay. I guess there's none in there. Then he starts to eat it as well, until Issei said, you forget I'm also a cannibal, right? Immediately, as Issei's dad took one bite of the jambalaya and swallowed it out of reflex, immediately looked at Issei, his face turned green, and he started running towards the bathroom up the stairs, while Issei was laughing, saying, I actually didn't, in his head. While he was laughing, Miki was currently still eating her food, and Issei just looks at her and says, you know do you even know if I actually put humans in that? And immediately, Issei's mom just said, I don't care. And Issei felt a little scared, so he was like, yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna go ahead and just go to school real quick. He gets up, immediately runs outside. Right when he goes to the front door, he opens it, closes it behind him, and his little goofy act he just did disappears. And a familiar face that he normally has appears. That cynical smile appears. His also ever-present red uniform he always wears, that red tuxedo, immediately walks all the way towards Kyo High, while Miki thinks in her head, while Issei's left, she thinks, I knew he didn't because I watched him make it. He just didn't notice. Back to Issei. Issei's walking towards Kyo High. As soon as he walks past the front gate, he still has his ever-so-present smile, never waving, also scaring off quite a few people. Some of the females were very, very excited to see him, but they were also offset by his smile, as it grew ever-so-present, further and further, until all of a sudden it stretched further and further across his face, to where you could literally see it tearing. His entire left side of his cheek was tearing, so was his right, and his smile kept on growing bigger and bigger. And people saw this, and a lot of people started screaming. Some started puking as the smile started ripping across his face. And he immediately looks towards the people, and he twists his neck to the side and completely flips his head all the way upside down and just said, What's up? While this would seem funny, it's not very funny for everyone else, as they all start running terrified of what he just did, as everyone started running away. Some people started blinking while looking at Issei with disbelief that this is happening, but as soon as they blinked, they noticed he was completely normal. Nothing like that happened. He just has his normal smile. None of that stuff happened? Were we just hallucinating or something? Is what they thought, as Issei walks all the way up to his classroom, snickering the entire time, of how just a little illusion could terrify so many people. The faces of despair they made, he thinks in his head, while his smile grows slightly bigger. He immediately walks up towards his classroom, opens the door, walks towards his desk, and sits down. As soon as he sits down, he feels as if someone's gazing at him. He looks towards the window that's near his seat and sees across from his classroom that the ORC classroom is there, and there's currently a Grimmery staring directly at him through the window. And Issei is wanting to test exactly how far he can push a Grimmery, or how far he can scare one. He heard that they were highly resilient from the previous Alastor, he thought in his head, as he immediately flared out some power, enough that made half the people in class fall asleep. Even the teacher fell asleep as he walked in, had his coffee in his hands, but then he felt an dreadful aura, as everyone else did. Half the students fell asleep, and he was about to fall asleep, but he fell to the ground as his coffee mug fell onto his lap as he was falling to the ground and poured all over his crotch, burning it at the same time, as he wanted to scream, but he felt too tired, and he felt too scared. He was shivering. He was also feeling a horrible sensation of that coffee, as he fell to the ground unconscious, and Issei just stared at that and just tried not to laugh like he really did, but he couldn't. He laughed just a little bit, a little chuckle. As Rias feels this way mostly on her POV change, Rias is currently shivering as Issei hasn't even looked at her, but the aura around him is making it to where she knows that he knows that she's staring at him. He knows that he's watching, but he just doesn't care, is what she thinks in her head. As Issei's head turns a complete 360 and looks directly out the window, it turns his head all the way around like an owl, and then puts it to the side of the window. He immediately stares directly at Grimmery, closes his eyes for a few seconds, and opens them, and all Rias could see was a bottomless abyss that was threatening to consume her. He immediately grew a little bit taller, as all of a sudden, dark clouds started to go above Kyo High. Everything was getting dark now. It was as if it just turned night all of a sudden, and lightning started to storm through the sky, as most people in Kyo High are now completely unconscious from Alastor's aura, or should we say Issei, as he is completely changing as lightning strikes. It flashes, and Grimmer could see a mere instance of Alastor or Issei going into his demon form. He started growing taller. He started getting his bones to thin out a little bit more. He started getting more lengthy. Antlers started to grow out of his head, and he had a tail, immediately having razor-sharp claws. This absolutely terrified Rias until she closed her eyes and opened them, thinking that it's just a hallucination. There's no way that that's the radio demon, she thinks in her head as she's shivering, and she stares directly at Issei, where Issei was as she opened her eyes. Then she notices that there's no dark clouds. There's not even anything wrong with the area, and no one's unconscious. Well, the people that were unconscious are waking up. So does the teacher, but the teacher's also screaming while he's waking up, saying, "That's some hot chocolate!" As that's happening, and Rias can hear that with her, devil hearing. She notices something odd about Issei's classroom. Issei's no longer in the classroom. This terrifies her to more of an extent, till she hears something from the ORC door, causing her heart to drop. It was so silent that you could hear a pin drop, except you could hear the knocking frequently. The knocking on the door, and it kept on getting a little bit louder, as she was scared that Issei was there, that she was going to die. She immediately tried to call Sir Zex, but then realized that Sir Zex is in a meeting right now. This is the worst time. She's starting to get scared. Her eyes are starting to tear up, as she realizes she can't keep the radio demon waiting. After all, he hates people that make him wait. as she walks towards the door, thinking of it as a death wish, seeing her life flash before her eyes. As she opens the door, and as she does, she sees Akino there. Immediately, she breathes a sigh of relief. She says, "Oh, it's just you, Akino." And she says, "Were you expecting anyone?" As Rias says, "No, no, I wasn't. Just come on in and close the door." She walks in and closes the door behind her. As all of a sudden, they both hear a clapping in the room, saying, "Fantastic! Fantastic!" That look on your face when you thought I would appear at the front door of all places. As the clapping continued, Reese froze as Akino was confused about what's happening. As she ends up saying, "Show yourself," as she started getting frustrated as he continued to laugh and clap. And Issei says, "Of course, my dear, my darling, I'll show myself." As all of a sudden, she saw something drop from the ceiling, and it was a card, a business card, and it says, "Let's make a deal." And it shows Alastor's face on it with the sinister grin he always wears. As she looks upwards, she sees Issei directly sitting down on the ceiling on a chair with a table that's somehow on the ceiling with him as he's drinking tea. He's drinking tea upside down right now while staring at Rias, causing her to absolutely freak out and think what the hell's happening. As everything starts to turn staticky for a little bit, and he seems to have disappeared. She can't find him now. He's not in his chair that's on the ceiling. And then she feels a tap from behind her. She says, "Not now, Akino." As she looks behind her and sees Issei right there. As Akino, who looked behind her to see what Rias was talking about, also saw him. They both instinctively jumped away. As Issei says, "So I've seen you've been checking me out quite often." He says as he walks closer towards Rias, as she ends up literally falling down onto the sofa and flipping it over as she's panicking, crawling backwards, having a mini panic attack as Issei is walking closer and closer. Until all of a sudden, Akino shoots lightning directly out of her hand with her magic, directly in front of Issei, causing a little burn mark on the ground in front of him. As Issei looks at her with just a little side glance, doesn't even fully look at her, she immediately says, "Stay away from her. You're not going to hurt anyone. As Issei says, "That's where you're wrong, my dear. You see, if I wanted to hurt someone, then I would have already done so," he says as everything starts to glitch around, as Akino starts to shiver. Not the good type of shiver that she usually loves, but a horrible one. One that she couldn't even get off to, which was quite odd for once. As Rias is staring at Issei in disbelief that such a powerful being can still be alive. Rumor said that he killed the god from the Bible. As Issei got closer towards her and says, "So, Grimory, I've heard about your not so willing marriage to a burning chicken, well, from a Kentucky Fried Chicken runaway. KFC runaway chicken? Yeah. So how about this? You end up making a deal with me. You owe me a favor, and I'll take care of that arranged wedding for you. You'll be able to go with anyone you want. You have the freedom that you've always wanted," he says as he gets closer towards her, lifts her off the ground, and puts his hand directly beside her. As she's completely frowning, thinking about Riser, until Issei puts both of his fingers directly onto her actual cheeks, and moves them upwards, making her smile, forcing it specifically with his fingers. And as soon as he does that, he says, "You never fully dressed without a smile. So why don't you keep one on?" he says, with his grin still adorned on his face. As Akino's currently still confused until she pieces it together that this is the radio demon, and so many sirens are going off in her head right now. And she's honestly thinking about calling Sir Zex. She tries to form a communication summoning directly beside her to call Sir Zex. But as soon as she tries to do this, Issei stares at her and says, "You can call Sir Zex after our little arrangement or little deal that me and Miss Grimmery have. Actually, I think it's fair if me and you are alone, Rias," he says, with the grin still on his face, as Rias is thinking about all of the options that she has, and he's the best option to get away from Riser. So she reluctantly says, "I'll make the deal," as Issei reaches out his hand, and green flames appear in the palm of his hand as Rias reaches out, and they're about to touch hands, to make the deal a reality, until all of a sudden, the person who's narrating decides to stop it right here. I hope you like this, and if you did, make sure you smash that like button, and make sure you destroy that subscribe button. Okay, see y'all.